And thank you for taking time out on a Friday to join us for the AF Weekender and our lovely speakers, Giulia and Sumona. I'm Nivedita, and welcome to the third session for the Weekender. If you've been with us since the morning, this is called Street Art, Reimagining Your City. When we think of street art, we tend to think of these large-scale murals that we've all seen in our cities and our communities, but rarely do we understand, think of the larger socio-cultural impact it has on our communities and what it can do to regenerate them. And in this session, Giulia Ambrogi, co-founder of st+art India, and Sumona Chakravarty, founder of Hamdasti, a Kolkata-based artists collective, will discuss how they reimagine India's urban living spaces and how street art is a catalyst for social change, and perhaps give you a glimpse into street art in larger international hubs as well. So Sumona and Giulia, thank you so much for joining us. A little bit about our speakers today. Giulia Ambrogi, who is joining us from Berlin, is a curator with a mission to spread the culture of public urban art. She initiated a few street art festivals in Italy and co-founded st+art India Foundation in 2014 as India's first platform for urban contemporary art. She also co-founded XXL Collective, an international creative agency that curates experiential art events and site-specific art interventions for global brands. Sumona Chakravarty is the founder of Hamdasti, a Kolkata-based artists collective that has been working on Chitpur Local, a community-based art project in the Batola area of Chitpur Road in Calcutta. Her work explores the role of art in society, testing its potential in building relationships and creating new visions for the future. Now I'm going to hand the session over to the lovely Sumona and to take it forward.
Thank you so much, Nivedita, and to the Art Forward team for organizing this Arts Weekender and for having us on board. I'm really excited to be in conversation with Giulia and to learn a lot about her work and a lot about the work the Street Art Foundation does, and also reflect a little bit about what street art really is, what it can do. But first, just wanted to share a little bit about myself, just to set the context and perhaps to trigger some conversation with Giulia as we move forward. So very quickly, I am the co-founder of Hamdasti, a community-based arts collective in Kolkata. And a lot of our projects have been based in this neighborhood called Chitpur Road. It's a very long road that runs north to south in the northern part of the city. And today we've been working in that area since 2014, but I'm just going to touch upon three small projects done by three different phases of our journey as a kind of lead in to start, unpacking ideas of street art. So as I said, the main project I'm going to focus on that Hamdasti has done is Chitpur Local, which is based at Chitpur. And over the last, since 2014, we've had about 15 artists and over 100 community collaborators working together. And the way in which we sort of do our projects is that they happen over the course of a year. They happen incrementally and then build up to a community art festival. So the entire process is a two-way process between the artist and their community collaborator, where they focus on one space or one aspect of this road and its history and develop art projects around it. And these festivals are followed by exhibitions and traveling labs so that we can take these conversations to other neighborhoods and spaces as well. So starting, this is just going to give you a very short video which just gives you a glimpse of this neighborhood Chitpur, where I find it very difficult to actually describe Chitpur in one word. It's this one long road which changes every 5 steps. So hopefully this 1-minute video will just give you a sense of the streetscape, as well as some of the things that some of the interventions or activities or engagements that we have along that road. As you can see, it's quite a historic neighborhood. There are many residential parts as well. These are some of our weird experiments. And there are also these very grand palatial houses. Like I promised, that was a very small sort of snapshot of the area, but basically it's this neighborhood which is built along the river around these very large palatial houses. So as as rich landlords started settling in the city, as it was being developed by the British, the neighborhoods that formed around them would service these large homes and families. And so there was a lot of different craft initiatives and in urban industries that came up around these larger palatial mansions, and these networks of neighborhoods evolved in a very chaotic but yet very beautiful way around these large mansions, connecting it again, running all the way up to the river. So we started working there with just a group of 4 artists in 2014. And our entry point into Chitpur was the school, the Oriental Seminary School, which is the second oldest school for Indians in Calcutta. And with it's a government school, and we started working with the boys of the government school. And this was a project done by 2 artists, Varshita Khaitan and Nilanjan Das. They again worked for almost a year with these boys, and 2 projects they came up with, which were then set up on street corners around the neighborhood. Um, and this one, the first was a pop-up museum where the boys went around the neighborhood collecting artifacts from their neighbors and from the shops and craft studios in the area. And they set up a series of games and displays in an old courtyard at the end of a road, at the end of a lane. And the other was a memory game. You can see this kind of box which was created using local print techniques, so collaborating with the local craftspeople. And that box was taken from one street corner to the other, and it was used to create a conversation about the neighborhood and its many memories and histories. So here, I guess there's a kind of, as you can see from the walls of Chitpur, they're already covered with all kinds of political graffiti, and it's a very dense neighborhood. So our idea of art is almost, is often in these almost pop-up interventions, or, what you know as pop-up, or it can be known as temporal or ephemeral interventions, where something comes and goes, comes and disappears. But for that moment, it galvanizes a kind of interaction and reaction, a dialogue, a discussion, and perhaps spurs some new ideas. So for us, really, when I go back to this image, this moment of people coming together, colliding against each other, exchanging ideas, becomes really what we try to build. And the art becomes a nexus or a kind of focal point for that, or becomes a catalyst for that in some ways. So the entire process of developing the projects and then sharing it with the larger community and bringing people from outside to the community to create a dialogue is what we actually try to build in each of our projects. Another lovely example of that is this project by Shrota Dotto. She was a writer. So a lot of the artists who work there also are not visual artists always. So she's a writer and a researcher. And she worked with the women and the photo studios of that neighborhood to collect stories about women and what it felt to be photographed to go to photo studios and be photographed before their wedding for the marriage market. When women used to be taken to the studios and framed in a particular way, you can see these smaller images in the background, which was used during the discussion, where they had to sit in a particular way or pose in a particular way so that they could be eligible for marriage. And these photographs would be circulated in the marriage market. So she created a series of dialogues. So this first one was at a home, at a joint family home in the neighborhood, between photographers and the women, on this idea of female beauty and of what it means to be a perfect wife or a perfect mother. And there was a series of such dialogues that happened in photo studios, and all these stories were collected and put in a bioscope and then circulated again, almost like a germ or a virus within public space, creating dialogues again around what it means to be a Griha Lakshmi, or a housewife, or a domestic goddess in that sense. So this was another very favorite project, where again the entire process, led up to something which was a really rich and layered interaction, but at the same time playful, at the same time, visual, at the same time, in a way that brings joy and sparks engagement in public spaces. And the final project which I wanted to highlight was actually a series of many interventions, almost 18 interventions across a journey along Chitpur Road, almost a 1 kilometer journey along Chitpur Road, where we call it the Chitpur Art Trail, and you would have to stop at different points along this journey. And this may connect to what Giulia speaks about later, because through these 18 stops or points, so this one was at an old library called Chaitanya Library, and there were several other such stops along the way. So through each of these stops, we were trying to show possibility of what this neighborhood could perhaps be. And through art, almost create a vision of what this neighborhood could look like, or the kinds of engagements and activities that could happen in this neighborhood. So for example, could a stamp shop, which has this amazing archival collection of 19th century stamps, become a place where people can come and learn about these stamps, try their own hands at making them, and all of them being driven by, all these activities being driven by people. So this entire trail none of us were the guides. It was a self-guided trail where one member of the community would guide you to the next point and then to the next point onwards. We were just there as volunteers because a lot of people get lost in this neighborhood just because it's a very dense and chaotic neighborhood. But that was our vision, that what if each of these, beautiful spaces where there's so much history and so much tradition, so much knowledge, local knowledge, could become a site for such encounters driven by the people who live there or work there themselves. This is a jewelry shop where they sell jewelry molds, and they were doing a workshop where they were demonstrating to people how they transfer the jewelry from the mold. So they devised this workshop, they planned it, and we imagine that in the future, if this could happen, on an ongoing basis, and people could experience and encounter local stories through this manner. And there were also cases where artists came in and they used local materials to create their own artworks. And so these pop-up, these were these images that popped up in all the local, there's a whole row of such shops, that come one after the other along Chitpur Road. So in each shop, there was one such photograph done by an artist called Swarup Datta. It was called Khalna Bati. So he was looking in, Khalna Bati means like playing with vessels and utensils as a child. And it's kind of a gendered activity. So he was creating these androgynous forms where both men and women were, using the Khalna Bati to, express themselves and break norms of gender expression. So this is also another instance that not only are local people driving it, but they're also collaborating with artists to come up with new projects, new visuals, even new products, perhaps. So this was really our vision for, a way of doing public art, a way of doing street art, where you present and almost bring forward ideas for what could be possible. Instead of deciding for people what is possible, you almost then show possibilities, and hope that opens up new directions and creates another round of changes and impact within the communities that you work with and that who are a part of your project. So this entire project was done by this last project that I described, the trail, was done with a collective, the Chitpur Craft Collective, which comprised of craftsmen and children from the area and artists who came together to develop this trail. So all of this is to really just say that when we think of street art, yes, there is this the artifact that you create or the image that you create, but there's also this process that happens behind the scenes almost, which in a way I think affects how that image then leaves traces or creates an impact or shapes what happens after. So I'm really excited now to really look at street art's journey, and to see how notions of street art, of public art, of community engagement have evolved over time, and where they are today with their vision for the work that they're doing in communities, not just in India, but across the world. So Giulia, over to you. Would love to just first learn a little bit about street art and share that with the audience, about Street Art Foundation. Um,
So, well, first of all, thank you, Art Fever, and for this weekender, and thank you, Sumona, so much. Actually, now I would love to ask you questions, more questions, but I guess that we could arrange for another, I don't know, session, Nivedita. But I think that first and foremost, I think that it has been very, very constructive, this introduction, because I guess that what you were saying about how many forms of street art can exist, not just exist, but can exist, are the most various. The interaction changes according to how what is our how can I say medium, and sounding board is the city. Kolkata, for instance, offers you those possibility of tracing the history and making it contemporary, which is just amazing, right? So I think that the very interesting part of what we do is that the cities are so different, streets are so different, environment are so different, and we must be informed by them and inform them back, right? So then, of course, according to different spaces, the techniques can be the most various. And I guess that what we have been doing in started very informally, and we didn't have any manual, exactly because the manual is the street in itself, right? And I think that that's what also gives us a lot of enrichment, right? Because we really need to hear what surrounds us and sort of to build on it, right? Mm-hmm. Then if it's good or not, we can't be also the judge of what we do. And I guess that the whole point is to introduce prototype of imagination, that kind of leads everyone in different ways and in open ways to their own conclusion, and therefore also to taking our prototype of imagination in different directions, as you were saying. So very quickly, like, I mean, I'm Giulia Ambrogi. I'm the co-founder and curator of Start India Foundation. We started in 2014, and we are 5 co-founders, and over the years the team has grown quite a bit. And I think that well, what we do is all about collectiveness. So the point for us has always been to share the grounds with the most different people. And of course, like, according to how our project has changed, also those people have changed. And now we work a lot also with governments, smart city missions. We never thought that we would have arrived to such an institutionalized position to a certain extent, which comes with graces and courses, I guess. And perhaps we can talk like about these later, and through the presentation, I think that you will have visuals to support what I'm saying. Over to you, Sumona. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. So could you just introduce us perhaps and talk about Start's journey through an early project and maybe one of your first projects, and then bring us to where you are now and what you're doing today, so we can see a change in this approach from something which was quite scrappy and sort of DIY to a place where you are now, almost working at an institutional level.
Sure. So I hope that everyone can see my screen. All right. So I think that, like, what it hasn't changed over the years is like what is really within our name. So sorry, like, it's not moving. Plus art. So that's the concept, like what street and art can do together. And the reason why, we thought to like bring art in the streets is because actually there are multiple reasons, but one of them is because like we believe that art is a catalyzer for positive dialogues. Or anyhow, like, for in kind of like democratic exchanges. We all know that like Indian streets are very polarized, and that's exactly where a lot of like, differences, like, amongst the population are the most visible. We also know that like, private and public, it kind of like is not divided and defined clearly, because a lot of people are living in the streets, they are working in the streets. So the streets are extremely alive. But at the same time, like, there is like this sort of perception that perhaps they don't belong to anyone. So the sense of belonging, the sense of power within your own fabric, both social and urban, is what, according to us, art could have done and could do. At the same time, in India, there are like very few galleries, very few museums, and a lot of artists. And we wanted also to sort of create another platform for artists to express themselves, contribute with their own expression to a larger cause. And that's why I think that this is like, the very core that is like still informing us in our practice. However, how it started was as Start Delhi, not as Start India Foundation. We started with this St+art in a city, which was Delhi in 2014, and it was a festival. We weren't a foundation at all. We weren't even thinking about, like forming a foundation. There are some aspects that I think we still preserved in our practice, which is, for instance, this is Shahpurjat. So Shahpurjat is an urban village, for who's not familiar with it, in South Delhi. Is like very much divided between, like the fashion street where all like, the cool people go, and instead the urban village where actually the workshops of the tailors of the fashion street are working, and the streets are like unpaved, and you have like this beautiful like color rivers that flow around, like, because of the dyeing process of the clothes. And basically what has happened is that, like, a bunch of like friends, literally they were all friends, okay, like belonging to the street art community. So those globetrotters that travel all around the world together, there is this sense of community in the street art, and they just want to explore in a very spontaneous way the streets. So they were going all around Shahpurjat and exploring day and night the small corner, big corner, and they were just like, reading the surrounding, like, and just trying to connect with it in also those small, simple ways. So bamboo ladder, like bucket of paint, and go, which of course like meant that there was like, a lot of like pieces that were popping out, and we were even aware, at times we were like, oh my God, like Bond has done another piece, and then another piece, and then another piece. And then, they were entering in schools, they were entering in houses, like as you can see, there are terraces, like school and all of it. And, it was a very organic sort of, spontaneous action and interaction, which of course was also meant not to last for a long time. It was really uncontrolled. It was relating to the spirit of, like sharing and doing, really, like, the act of doing, I would say. As you can see also, the way in which we were painting, like from bamboo ladders to julas, were pretty, like basic somehow, also dangerous. At the same time, we were thinking, okay, it's our first festival. Let's focus on Chapurjat, actually also on Oscar's village. Let's understand this like village reality. But Delhi is like many cities in one. You have the urban villages, you have the slums, you have the colonies, you have the gated colonies, then you have the Lieutenant Delhi, then you have the central Delhi. I mean, Delhi is like an onion, really. And the more you peel it, the more you have like layers of interaction. And we wanted to just like have a taste of what those layers of interaction could have brought us, right? So along with a very spontaneous, also almost guerrilla-like action in Shapurjat, like we've done a sort of like, let's say, a landmark, like in the sense that this is Delhi Police Headquarter, is in ITO. You see this building like 1 kilometer far. And of course, like this is the portrait of Gandhi. Of course, like this piece also has opened up like perhaps like another sort of path for us, in the sense that, of course, this was like a big collaboration with the government, and this like also led us perhaps like, in our like past, like in our future at that time, to kind of like, have a presentation card, like a business card, really, like, with such a visual. And so it was in Tihar jail. This was like 1 kilometer long wall. As you were saying, Sumona, before, like also like, connecting with the craft of India. I think that one of the many aspects is that Indian streets are like so vibrant and so creative, like you have creativity at every corner if you just want to look at it. And what we are trying to do, especially Hanif Qureshi, who's one of the co-founder of Start, he runs this project called Hand Painted Type. So he tries to sort of, archive like funds from different regions of India, digitalizing them, sell them, and let the money go back to the painters, as well as we always try to kind of like have a sign painting project in each one of our projects. This one was basically the result of a work also within Tihar jail with like a group of prisoners through workshops. And this is a poem written by one of the inmates, which is called Char Divari, which means 4 walls. So like the whole point is that the 4 walls are within us, and like that's what we have to sort of try and fight against, or like trying to break. And that's also what street art does, right? Like, I mean, we try to break walls somehow through those sort of window of different perception. So yeah, like that's like one of the like our old projects. And like here, just like as a peel, like like we haven't, like we've done workshops in Dwarka, with schools. So many aspects of our work were already there, but I would say that they were a little bit less registered in their potentials. It was much more, like, yeah, like younger, perhaps a younger approach, let's say, which then, like, I think, like was the beginning of a longer journey for which you don't have a manual, as we were saying amongst us. And I think that practice is the only thing that then, further on can inform you better of where you want to take it or where you could take it. So yeah, and then moving on, like then we became st+art India Foundation in end of 2014. And here we are in 2020 with very different approach somehow, which are like the art districts. But I think that you want to get into that yourself with questions.
So I mean, I guess, there's this initial start as something which almost pops up and disrupts and then goes away. And often I think even in our work, you are asked this question about the parachute approach of an artist, that you come and you go, and then what, and how when you talk about guerrilla movements, you're actually talking about the people off the area themselves, almost taking over their you're asked, what is your position really when you're coming in, addressing a space. So there's been a interesting also evolution of your approach in terms of long-term engagement in certain neighborhoods. I mean, the Lodhi Art District probably being the more well-known one of all of them, but is there any that you'd like to talk to us about as you negotiate and navigate this tension between disruption but also then engagement and dialogue?
Yeah, so I mean, like, we have like right now like 6 projects that, as you can see, they all started in different years, but they're still ongoing. So see, like, I mean, Shapurjat, for instance, was a neighborhood that is ever changing, right? Because it's much more of an informal sort of like gentrificationable like place, right? All our other districts except for Panjim, and Makta also, actually, we identified like areas belonging to the government because the risk of gentrification is not there, and also the urban fabric is like most of the times like much more controlled. So just like to get get into the core of it, like the very last projects that actually, as we speak, we are kind of doing 3 walls this year, exactly because of this sort of ongoing presence, right? Is like Kannagi Art District. Kannagi is in Chennai, first of all. And I mean, I put this photo just like for you to see that, yes, like if before they were julas and bamboo ladders, now we have lifts, which are indeed much more comfortable for the artists especially, and allow, better pieces to come up. Because one of the things that we try not to negotiate with is like the quality of art. But then I think I'm gonna speak about this like a little later. So this was the before, okay? So what is Kannagi? Kannagi is an immense neighborhood with which has like 94,000 people. One of the things that really struck me, it was that, see, like, I don't know if you could see the streets, but those 2 cars were our cars, okay? So imagine 94,000 people, but no car, all right? So like this is basically the largest like displacement like colony, like replacement colony, like built by the government to house like majorly fisher folks affected by the tsunami of 2012, and also slum dwellers that were sort of like, living all around Chennai. And they put all of them here, right? Which, of course, I mean, it's very easy to criticize the government. It's very hard also for them to, of course, like, kind of like give release, like, I mean, to sort of like such incredibly difficult dynamics, right? At the same time, what is happening in Kannagi is that those people have been moved and pushed very far from their previous like working place and living spaces. This place is not close to the sea and they have no money. So for them, taking a rickshaw to go to their workplace is also something that they can't afford on a daily basis. Long story short, this place became like a sort of hub, unfortunately, for crime, prostitution, drug. I mean, they had to sort of like survive somehow, right? So when we were Googling Kannagi, like, just like these horrible sort of news were coming up. And then we really wanted to go there because, of course, like for us now, in our more organized structure, there are like a series of criteria that we kind of like, like think that are very valid. One is the urban fabric, meaning, is it a walkable space? In India, it's very hard to walk. And to us, to create a hub for this sort of prototype of imagination for those big cities to have livable spaces, we need to walk. That's the only way where we can also like sort of exchange like, like ideas and etc. Second, of course, we like big canvases because our main medium and also our initial catalyst are murals, indeed. So those buildings, as you can see, are so many, infinite number of canvases, all the same and big. And at the same time, what's the story behind? The story behind is exactly what I was telling you, right? So the point is that we thought, okay, let's go and check from our, from our eyes. We arrived in this place, which is basically music, like game, like street game, like never ending, day and night, kids and all of it. And we thought, okay, this place is very different from what, like media are portraying. And as a result, this horrible like portraiture, like is kind of like also making the people of the place like being seen in a very bad way. So as a result, they also don't get jobs because they are seen as Kannagi Nagar, like, resident and dwellers, and therefore you are, not good. So that's what we started doing. We invited 15 artists, like 5 international, 5 Indian, and 5 local. So also to create this kind of platform that is very open, that open up also a sort of outlook towards diversity, because we think that key also in this sense is diversity is the only way to understand each other by the end of it, and being responsive to change as well. And this ground, like that before was a mess. Like, I mean, it was, you can see, I mean, there was like nalas, like open nalas and all of it. We kind of like requested to the government to fix it. So now we are also at this stage where we are trying to sort of create a kind of like, a valuable encounter where we know that we can do something, but we can't do it all. And, if there is the interest of having a different facade or a different image, then there should also be the interest of really refurbishing, like very bad sort of situations, such as an open nala that has like a lot of like diseases that can pop up. And so the government cleaned up the whole space, basically, not just the ground, but also the by lanes. And slowly we are like actually having like a long-term agreement. So like year by year, we are going to add in terms of both facade and also like, urban sort of like regeneration. Each one of the artwork, like in all our art district, is specific to the place. So we try basically to go there like months in advance to create a sort of toolbox for the artist, where we have a lot of like photos of the city, photos of the area, narration, like, kind of like stories, and of course both visuals and in words. And the theme of the art district largely is people and environment. So what environment can do to us, like if it's of course like not respected somehow. And we were referring to majorly fisher fox, which of course depend on the environment immensely, much more than us, right? Like on a daily basis. And actually, like, what it means also to actually have to rebuild your home in an environment that is very different. In order to do that, basically, we've done a lot of community projects since the very beginning. Which started like, with us with a megaphone, like going around. This is Nila, like our really spoken person, like in Kannagi, and she's from there. So like the community projects have been of the most different kinds. Like we also collaborated with 3 local NGOs, and also Chennai Photo Biennale. So we've done the most different sort of like, activities, such as these like postcard projects. So basically like a group of kids for 2 months, like with Urban Design Collective, great collective over there. So basically a bunch of kids, like 15 in group, they were going around with cameras, like photographing basically what for them is Kannagi, and creating an alphabet of Kannagi. And then those postcards have been sent randomly all around Chennai. So point being is that Kannagi is damn far from the center, is like absolutely not an area of interest, but is part of the city. Like the city is not just done by centers, right? So how to kind of like, shift the power, and, how to create through art, as you were saying, very different dynamisms. And that's, like simple things like that, like you get to discover your own city, through a postcard, like, done by a kid. And then of course we've done like many workshops. I think that I would leave like perhaps like, the word to you, but all those workshops have been a culmination. And, we've done this like wall, that was the community wall, where all the words were kind of like first the background, but also like the words were painted by, the people of the neighborhood, and they were like really identifying what for them is Kannagi, to create that sense of belonging, and not that like, we come, we paint beautiful facades, and then we go. And then like we culminated this like with a community showcase that lasted for 2 days, where basically like, I don't know like how many people of Kannagi and outside came, and we really vary from Ghana music, which is like a very politically rooted, like very energetic, like Tamil Nadu music, to very traditional dances, to performances of the most different kinds, and also closing with a more famous sort of rapper contribution. So really, again, like also we're there to give the spectrum of how much culture is like infinite, and actually to bring them at the core and at the center of the entire project. So yeah, that's just like appeal.
Which year was this in the community showcase, the last picture?
This one?
Yeah, the showcase, the community showcase. Around when was that?
Oh, so this was like, well, right before COVID. I mean, it was basically at the edge of COVID. So it was 6th of March.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Right at the edge.
Like really when like, like, yeah, in Italy, like my mom was very worried. And I was like, Mommy, here, like no one has even seen an airplane. So I'm very much safe because in Europe, COVID already sort of, exploded. And I was like, yeah, safer here. And actually, talking about COVID, sorry, because I think that it's a kind of an interesting thing. So the government never had like a very, how can I say, smooth relationship with Kannagi dwellers. And when I'm talking about smooth, I'm just talking about our relationship, Apparently, because we also run interviews with government and with the community after that we do our project, apparently has been the project that we've done that lasted for 4 months, with so many activities, have been a great tool to kind of like create COVID centers that people were really sort of interacting with. In the sense that, like creating that sense of community then helped in also the COVID control. So that, when they ask about impact, which is a question that I'd never like, but those are like, the things that you are also getting surprised, that you're like, okay, wow. So
yeah.
there is something.
Absolutely. So, do you all have plans? I mean, this is one example of one art district, but do you have plans to like continue this project? And if so, if Kannagi, which is otherwise quite a like violent site of displacement, right? A site of the memory of the site is very much of this violent displacement and stripping of rights and stripping of livelihoods. So, when you sort of recast that as an art district, what is your vision for what this art district can look like? Like, who will it involve? What will it look like? What will the experience of it be? What will public space be like? And what will the urban infrastructure be like? And what is also the kind of the people who live there? And what is their hope for this neighborhood which they have been displaced into? I mean, you can see there's not even a single tree there. Forget about access to the river, and these spaces are built with so little humanity and so little empathy for the people who are being dislocated here. So what is kind of your vision for this neighborhood as an art district versus, and what is the vision of people there, and how do you negotiate that? How do you have those dialogues? How do you decide how to move forward? Yeah.
So, Sumona, this is like a incredibly difficult question, right? Because at times, and I'll be very honest, like, I mean, at times as a cultural operator, you must ask also very difficult questions to yourself, right? I mean, at times, I can't deny that I thought, and I'm still thinking, like the poverty that there is in some neighborhoods where we have been working is like immense, right? And is that what they need the most, And then because like, of course, like, I mean, it's like a very banal question, but that's the reality as well, right? And then you're like, okay, first and foremost, I can't be the answer, neither me, myself, or, Start or the movement, right? But I can be one of the trigger of a different sort of, like curse, whatever this is, So I think that the whole point is that, as we were saying before, there is no manual. There is like, of course, like a vision, and there is like a desire, really like a strong desire of contributing with what you know best, which in our case is art. We don't know economy as such. We don't know, we know art, and we perhaps like each one of us has been like profoundly like sort of influenced by art in the best way possible. So I think that the point here is, like, as we said before, is to sort of shift that platform and, you know, to shift the outer vision, which means also the inner vision. Till the time you are considered as a criminal, you will be a criminal, full stop. Like, how you would ever imagine, you know, to have a different sort of, you know, possibility if you have not been shown any in your life. So I think that, you know, is as basic as that. But in order to do that, and that's the reason why those art districts, which are very different all across India, perhaps we will touch upon Lodhi art district, is a very different environment. However, like, I think that in those, like, communities, you need to spend time, which means that, you know, it's an ongoing process. This year we are just going to do 3 walls. We are going to do a rooftop project, which is basically going to create an aerial view of Kannagi as well, because the aerial is incredible, but is also going to isolate the roof from heat and water. So every time you sort of, like, can sort of regenerate your practice, understand, hear what are the problems, and, you know, like, sort of build on that. You know, like the rooftop thing, aside, that is Asian Paints, that is one of our main partner that is, like, very interested in trying this out in Chennai, also as a product, you know, like, which is incredibly important, like, you know, what a product can do, as simple as that. But also it came about because last year, in all the workshops that we've conducted in the public schools, in 2 questions, which were, what do you recognize Kannagi for, and what would you like to see in Kannagi? A lot of, like, same images were popping up, which is, like, the moment where the water tanks are getting filled in summer, which happens, like, after also a scarcity of water, and kids are kind of, like, running up on the terraces and kind of, like, you know, being, you know, like, just, like, close to the water tank to get a shot, like, I mean, to get water, you know. So we thought, okay, how, you know, like, how we can kind of, like, but then this water, like, of course, like, drips in the houses and etc., etc. So, you know, like, I think that is the constant engagement, that it's the most important thing, because otherwise it's an appearance that tickle as a promise, but doesn't affect at all. So the point is to have a long-term vision and to build on it. And that's also when more and more you can take people of the community in. So what has happened in our previous art district is that the production people are people from the neighborhood. The one who does the curated tours are people from the neighborhood. More and more, you know, like the small little, like, food stall, like, they're getting sort of, you know, renewed and becoming, you know, like, as part of the visual landscape. So it's a long-term engagement, and local entities and local people are, of course, absolutely, like, you know, the core of it. But the trust, you know, and a sort of prolific system can be built, just as I said, over time, which is what we are trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise the murals fade and the, you know, the artwork fades, but then what remains, I guess, is the question. So, you know, now this seems like quite an ambitious thing, managing all these art districts and doing it in such a sort of scale, but also doing it in a deep manner. So, you know, what would you say? You know, when a neighborhood like this becomes an art district, in a way, who is it for? Are you envisioning it as a space for tourists? Are you just envisioning a more safe and you know, vibe, like a safe community, or are you envisioning a community that has more art in its life? So break this down, this idea of an art district, down for us a little bit. In this, you can use other examples as well of other, you know, neighborhoods where you've been working.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that, I mean, see, like, I think that the good part of it is that there are all those things together, you know. It starts, like, you know, with a bunch of murals, which are beautifully looking and appealing. And then it starts as, like, again, community engagement. But then it takes a lot of different shapes, right? And for instance, with Lodhi Colony in Delhi, where we started in 2016, and it's a very different environment. As you can see, actually see here, you can see trees, and you will see it also from the photos. But it's a very different environment. It's like bang in the middle of Delhi, it's right behind Lodhi Garden, always belongs to the government. Why we chose this like place, it's because in Delhi, you literally don't walk. And there are extremely few public spaces, one of which perhaps is Lodhi Garden, where you have really like the full spectrum of the population of Delhi. And here, and otherwise, you know, there are malls which are not public in nature, or the little parks like, you know, within the colonies, but that's almost it. So we were like always looking at these walls. As I said, we always start from the canvases, not always, but most of the times. And then we stopped the car in 2015, actually it was, and we just started to take a walk. And we were like, oh my God, like, I mean, there are sidewalks, there are trees, the streets are broad, there is not that much traffic, still essential. There is the metro close by. And we have like more than, I don't know, 100 walls, belongs to the government. So as you can see, there is not Vodafone board, Oppo, these, that, it's completely blank, right? There is no visual pollution, let's call it this way, and no possibility of gentrification. So over the years, from 2016 till now, we've done like 54 walls, but also so many activities, you know, like from the Holy Rangoli, like with the community, to much more structured, speak about perhaps right now. But the point is basically,
just to interrupt, these are government quarters, right? These are not displacement colonies, so it doesn't have that same kind of
correct.
association or you know, history, in a sense of that kind of erasure or exclusion.
Absolutely. Those are government quarters. See here, that's also the other thing, right? Those are government quarters, which means that, like, you know, low, medium level of Delhi government people, especially CPWD, who's the owner, like, are living there, which means actually that most of them have a rotation of, I don't know, 10, 15 years, 20 years, which means that also the community is more fragile, right? Because it's not that, oh, I've born here, I lived here for my entire life, right? So the sense of community is slightly different. But the point also, in order to show you what, you know, in general an art district can be, is that we didn't put this on Lonely Planet, you know, everything happened really organically. And also what has happened organically is that due to also the fact that street art is really local, but is also very global because of the internet, because of the Instagram and Facebook, a lot of people get to know about it because of those digital medium, right? All of a sudden, like, Lodhi Colony, you know, got so many people, like from kids that were doing, you know, their video shoot for a music video, for a fashion shoot, just for fun. We discovered the most incredible, like, you know, initiative. Like, I mean, there were like a bunch of people that were like posting like posts, like, you know, posts on like physical posts on the walls with their comments, and it was like a sort of treasury, like, you know, discovery, where they were also commenting each other. So the point is that those places are open platforms. We of course are pretty much aware that tourism is one of the is one of the, you know, like, possibility, because has been years that street art is really moving like flow of tourism. It's not a coincidence that on airlines, you know, like booklet and brochures, you have always an article about street art. It goes in this city because, you know, so of course is a driving, you know, factor. We know that. Of course, it's much easier to bump into Lodi because it's close to Khan Market and Lodi Garden than going to Kannagi all the way. But also in Kannagi, right after 2 months, we started seeing faces that, you know, are really not to be seen in such space, right? And that's the whole point, whatever shapes it takes, you know, and whatever, like, you know, usage of the space it can be done, till the time, of course, is like a respectful and prolific and creative usage. It's amazing because we don't pretend to do everything ourselves, you know, but the point is that trigger that you were speaking about, you know, and is exactly like, how do you want to take it? Like, of course, like, and the point is like to have that dialogue, right? Because till the time like our communities are going to be closed, there is not going to be any sort of possible change, like, because if you don't understand the other, how can you respect the other, and I think that that's the whole point. So we work a lot with transgender community every time through our Art project. Nila, is like this amazing, like, woman, that, like, I mean, trans woman that, like, went on Kannagi, like, stage with like a short skirt, like, with all her energy, like how to, again, shift the stereotypes. So I think that, yeah, that's the potential of what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And is there something that you hope doesn't happen? And in terms of, bad art districts that you've seen, or art districts that completely perhaps take over spaces from local communities, or don't include their voice or their perspective, or, impose something. I mean, there are examples all over of the world, I guess, of art districts. So what would you say is an art district that you would like to emulate, or an art district maybe that, you want to take some lessons from, and,
Yeah.
and look at more critically, perhaps?
So, I mean, emulate, I think that, see, like, that's also one of the very big mistakes that a lot of times is done, because I think that emulation is what we should not do, because we do public art, right? Which means that you need to read the site specificity of the space. The art in Lodhi Colony is very different from, like, the art in Kannagi, for instance, right? So also, for that matter, when we talk about smart cities and we try to take like a concept that is like from Amsterdam, it's quite problematic, because the fabric of the city, both social, urban, economical, is so different. Amsterdam is like such a small city, very rich, like already smart because it's pedestrian and all of it. How can you import it? You cannot, So I think that indeed emulation is not the best way ever. In what all we do, because also it kind of like gets just a superimposed sort of format rather than being really critical somehow. But I mean, just like perhaps to laugh a little bit, and also to make perhaps the audience know of how many type of interaction that can be created, like through street art, and therefore also what we don't want to do. That's something that we know. So there is this like oh well, sorry, here there was like all the community projects, but there is this neighborhood in Miami which is called Wynwood. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because one very, very dear friend, which is also an incredible artist that came to India as well, Agostino Iacurci, when I invited him to Lodi, he was like, Giulia, are you doing Wynwood? And I'm like, oh God, no. Why? Now, the art in Wynwood is amazing. I mean, and there are like also perhaps artists that came also to our projects. So this is how it looks. I don't know if you could see, and the photo is very bad, pardon me, but I don't know if you can see, there are like all these ex-warehouses with those beautiful walls, and it's very large. Okay, now this like neighborhood, the art is very beautiful because it's being curated by a very important curator that actually is also the one who did the very first exhibition of street art in a museum. Okay, so with a great knowledge about the movement, about the best artists, etc. But who's behind it? Behind there is the real estate. The real estate that basically wanted to, with like, of course, like, Miami becoming bigger, becoming also much more popular and famous and all of it, new spaces are required, right? New spaces for business, essentially. So this real estate company, very big in America, took over this entire like place, right? They bought all the warehouses and they thought, okay, how do I make it cool? And how do I then sell those warehouses to restaurants, shops, loft, very expensive loft, and etc. Great, let's give another facade. So I'm posing this example in order to see, like, and to show that this facade can be devil and can be great. There is a reason why, art has always been, so important in the human history, not right now, in the human history. And why has always also been used by power, if you think of the church, if you think of the temples and etc., right? is because it has an extremely, extremely good power of like sort of, getting to you, into you, and really activating something very particular. Now here, like basically they've done amazing art for not such great purposes, because it was like a fully real estate operation. Hands up, you can do that, but for us, public spaces should be public in nature, which means also that if you want a museum, you do your museum, or you treat it in a different way, but you don't, the operation can be very, very tricky. That's the whole point. So I think that what we are trying to stay a little bit away is that sort of gentrification of the areas, because we want people to appropriate their own spaces and not being disappropriated because of the art. So yeah.
Wonderful. And so thanks so much, because that sort of, also draws attention to the specificity of a space that perhaps, Kanagi cannot become, or you don't perhaps do not wish it to become a tourist space, while Lodhi can, because the people there also have different amounts of power, or different, positioned differently in society. If there was somebody coming in from outside to Kanagi, that gaze might be very different, or that interaction or approach might be very different. Somebody coming into Lodhi, to a middle class colony, that gaze or that interaction, that power balance might be completely different. So each neighborhood has its own set of challenges, and perhaps own potential of what art can do in that neighborhood. I guess, and we see street art also coming up, as a part of a social process, as a part of a political process, whether we see that in Shaheen Bagh and the art that came up there so powerfully in Delhi, and even in the history of public art and public murals in India, in Shantiniketan with Nandalal Bose and the artists there who used murals as a form of education, as a form of identity building. So there's this kind of rich social, public, political engagement that actually, almost sometimes gives birth to street art. So what would you weigh? I mean, how would you weigh this beautiful image that we see and circulates through our social media feeds and creates such a vibrant impact? I mean, would you sometimes forego the beauty of that image for the power of the process or the potential of the process? Or, how do they weigh against each other, and how would you balance that? How would you balance those two? Like I said, in Chitpur, and I know you all have also come and done a project at Shonagachi, which is on Chitpur Road, there aren't any walls, so sometimes we choose art. I mean, the visual almost becomes a backdrop, or a kind of, node, but the dialogue and the process becomes very important. So I was just wondering, how do you balance the two? Does one sometimes take over the other, and does that get frustrating? How do you do that? How do you negotiate the two, and the importance of both really in this street art process?
So, I mean, first of all, you speak about identity. And I think that, I mean, we weren't, for the audience, we didn't speak about that. And still, like, I mean, this project, Inside Out project, really speaks about that. So I think yeah, that's very interesting. See, like in general, and then I go into these two examples, you can't have it all. As soon as you want to tick all the boxes, you may get lost in translation, As we said throughout this session, the possibilities of a city offers you are endless. And I think that also what you were saying, like the powerful picture versus more longer, deeper, structured, community-driven projects is not a versus, but actually they could come together. Why? Because eventually we know that we live in a society of spectacle, and I always think that spectacle is not enough and should not be the criteria or the tool that you are using to build your practice on. But I also think that at times can be important, and I'm especially relating to places such as like the big Indian cities where there is so much, so much, and the cities are so extremely large that level of awareness at times, and when I'm talking about awareness, I'm talking about a simple awareness of, oh, that happens, or that exists, can be achieved when you do a spectacular project. So I always look at the spectacle as that very important ingredient into the larger picture. So I think that also at times, being fundamentalist in one's practice, it doesn't perhaps necessarily help, because you need both. You need the very pop, and you need the very, kind of, high culture, or high practice, let's say, with research and etc. So and at times, the two things can also come together. Why not? So talking about identity, talking about how to negotiate, talking about the compromises and etc. We've done this project in Sassoon Dock. Now, I can talk about this like for hours, so I'm gonna save your ears from that, and you can find more information online, I'm sure. So we were working in Bombay in 2017, and again, we were trying to sort of, look at the DNA of the city. Okay, so how many cities are within Bombay and what connects them all? By the end of it, we kind of selected like 4 spaces that, according to us, of course, were particularly interesting to talk about the DNA of a city which is changing in a very, very rapid way, right? So long story short, this is like the oldest dock in town, which means that basically is in Kolaba, where, by the way, all the big galleries are, and Sassoon Dock is where the Koli tribe mainly, so the fishermen, like the fisher folk tribe of India, like sort of settled, and they are the settlers of the city in itself. Now, what is happening to these identities is that basically this like entire space, which is huge, it became the biggest whole fish market of Maharashtra, so the whole region where Bombay is, right? Right at the back, there are like those super expensive skyscrapers, which are like popping out, in the glimpse of an eye. Okay, so these identities and these communities that made Bombay, they still are a very relevant part of the identity, of the economy, of everything in Bombay, right? And they occupy all the shores, so they actually have like, amazing like spots, right? And therefore they are getting pushed away and away with, again, dynamics of displacement, which are unregulated, and that belong to sort of like private interests, right? So long story short, we kind of like did this project. I don't know if you can see like the 2 white facades in here. So we've done this project like over the 8 months, and we've transformed those 2 warehouses which were empty into an exhibition venue, which was open for all, and barefoot fishermen and Bollywood producers were entering at the same time. All the works were based on the past, the present, and the future of Bombay through the eyes of fishermen. We had like an entire team dedicated to community project, and this project, okay, which is like, started from JR, which is one of the most important like street artists in the world, and he does these open source projects, and this is called Inside Out, which is beautiful, right? Because it's like inside is a very intimate thing that goes out in the streets and speak out loud for yourself, and we've wrapped around, all the warehouses, which were, as you were entering, right, with 300 portraits of fisher folks, like from Koli, Banjara, and Marathi tribes. So the process, like, of course, has been, incredible, because again, many dynamics like then came across also. Women were asking us why they were pasted like, close to men, and how this could have caused problems. Like Banjara, like Koli, that is like a higher caste, was asking us like why we are pasted close to Banjara people. So within those identities, such a project can really shake a lot of dialogues of comprehension and awareness, right? So the thing is that in this case, I think, there was everything. There was the community sharing, there was the research on the community, there was the sort of, like identity speaking for themselves. And within that community, also a lot of dynamisms, like, that could have, potentially changed. And then also a beautiful picture, if you want to say so, right? It was ephemeral, it was temporary. These are posters, so again, it's a beautiful picture that stays as a documentation, but perhaps, as you were saying, Sumona, in your works, how it's important to actually activate memories, different sort of connection with your own space, I think that this like may change more than a big, beautiful, everlasting sort of, picture. And then when it comes to the spectacle, the same year, while we were doing this very, community-based project, also spectacular, perhaps in some of its pieces, we were doing this, again, the sort of landmark. This is Churchgate Station. For the ones who know Bombay, it's kind of like, in the heart of the South Bombay, so the old part of the city. It's a station that basically changed its face incredibly from the 19th century till today. And it's called like the lifeline. In Bombay, trains are called the lifeline of Mumbai, right? And they're very democratic. So we chose this image because Gandhi, of course, chosen the train stations as one of its favorite stages, and trains in Bombay are, as I said, very democratic. However, this is like a project which is like absolutely easy to comprehend, not community-based, and is that spectacular picture that anyhow, perhaps contributes a little bit to the present of our cities, because we have so much history, but what are we doing for the present? Not too much. So yeah, I think that that's also the purpose of it. So I think that both interventions are needed, let's say, in different ways.
I didn't mean to say, I said those two as kind of a versus, but it's more like a thought experiment. If you pit two things against each other, it sort of, help you think through it. And thanks for working through that question. And I think you really beautifully sort of detailed the pros and cons of both. One last question, I think, before handing over to Nivedita, is that, does placing art in public spaces make it public? Can it sometimes alienate people more? Suppose you put something up and there's a lot of censorship. Is that public, especially when you're working on state land and there can, on state property where there can be censorship? If you put up an image that nobody can relate to or cannot somehow access, does that end up being more alienating? So how do you actually make public art public, or some of the things that you try to do or think about when you make public art or street art actually for and of the public in a way?
So, I mean, of course, again, I talk from my /our perspective, which can be very partial. There is art in public spaces and public art, right? Art in public spaces, I think, is like those grandiose kind of sculptures, which are also very expensive at times, and they pop up all of a sudden, no one knows about it. And then the day after, everyone oh my God, there is this huge sculpture and etc., right? Which feels a little bit alienating, as you were saying, and expropriating, because no one has been really consulted. There was this sort of thing amongst, I don't know, government for permissions and some rich people with money, and that's about it, right? When we talk about public art, it's a matter of, I think, reading the space. And of course, the reading, it's partial, because we it's very hard to sort of perhaps think of all the components. But I think when we talk about public art, is this very horizontal platform where there is us, the government, the locals, perhaps another NGO that is much more aware than us about local dynamics, because Tamil Nadu and Delhi or Maharashtra are two different Indias as well, So I think that when, as I said, art in public spaces is where you just pick up something and you display it in a public space. That thing could be a mural, could be a sculpture, could be in a mall, in your house, in a gallery venue, or in a square. It doesn't change its meaning, and therefore it's alienating, I think, because it doesn't talk with the surrounding. What we are trying to do in our very little sort of practice is actually hearing more voices. And I think that that's where it becomes public. It can still be offensive for some, perhaps. It can still be problematic for others, but it's an activator of dialogues where already many voices came before the result. Because what we do is what you see is the result, but the process is what is the most interesting part, actually. So I think that that's the difference when the process is already public.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julia. And on that note, thank you to the audience. We have lots of questions, so maybe we'll get to that. Nivedita, do you want to take us through it, or should I just pull up some questions? I can immediately see there's a question about, legal issues that come up, or how do you create buy-in of, when you're painting a wall? How do you create buy-in of people who live there? So this is a question from Shruti, and also we have a question on the permissions to paint on specific walls from Neha. So one is the legality of it, and one is the buy-in of people for it. How do you do both? Is negotiate both? I think is one of the questions. Two
I
of the
mean,
questions.
the legality, it's basically, it changes spaces by spaces, of course. In Lodi, I'll just give you an example, like there were many bodies. So there were like CPWD, which is like the Central Public like Work Department. Then there was DUAC, that was the hardest to crack, which is like Delhi Urban Art Commission. Lodi Art District like falls under the lieutenant part of Delhi, which means that is like controlled by Delhi Urban Art Commission that has to preserve the identity of the space. That was extremely hard to sort of tackle and understand that cities are changing, and also the it's not destroying the identity, is adding another layer. Long story short, over there is just a matter of spending hours and hours and hours with your files at hands in the government office, and just like, sort of, being, like, okay, now you go there, like fifth floor, and then you, so it's a very tedious like process where the legality of it stands into a written sort of like agreement, of course, with the government, who's the owner of the spaces. When it comes to the streets, even if we could have done anything we wanted, because when you have like, I mean, the approval of the, of the owner of the building, whomever this like owner is, you could do technically everything, right? That doesn't mean that even if there are not legal binds, like you don't listen to people, as we were saying. So we always like start with residents connection through newspapers, through pamphlets. We have the most different ways, megaphones and WhatsApp groups, union leaders when it came to Sassoon-Dock. So legally we are fine, we are safe. Once, like, we struggle for 1 year, like, to get the legal permissions, technically we are good. But for us, we are not good. So even if there is no legal implication, then we go really, really strong in the community engagement that starts much, much before our projects, minimum 3, 4, 5 months before. We found WhatsApp group and pamphlet to be very helpful in order to connect, as simple as that. When it comes to private neighborhoods such as Makta, our district. Now, Makta, for instance, is in Hyderabad, is largely populated by a community of Muslim people. So there, like, of course, there was like, I mean, an extra care for them, like, I mean, like for this community, having living being painted on the walls, it's a problem, right? It goes like against their own belief system. And therefore there was another extra care, right? Like, I mean, taking everyone approval for the permissions, because private permission, it means that you have to check who all lives in that building, who's the owner, who's not the owner. Whomever is the owner must, like, be connected, and legally, like sort of, requested for an approval. But then even so, like, then the sketches, are you representing, living beings? So there is like always like the legal part, which is as important as the non-legal, because there is sensitivity aside from legality, I guess.
Absolutely. And for us, I think working with schools has always helped. Like, in Chitpur, initially nobody wanted to work with us, but once we started working with students there, when people felt like it was something good for the children of the neighborhood, they started getting involved a lot. And each project sort of leads to an understanding of, especially since our art is not visual art, it's very difficult to explain what is, it's often not visual art, difficult to explain what exactly we're going to do. So definitely building that trust over time is something that creates a lot of buy-in. And now every time we even approach a new community within Chitpur, they tell us, oh, that Oriental project, which means the project from the school. So that's always a tie-up, it's always a connection to that thing. So there are two questions which relate to a similar idea of sort of washing over or taking over the memory or aesthetics of a space. So one of the questions, I think you already addressed this a bit, Julia, but I'll just bring it up. So one is this: are you concerned with art washing, which sometimes accompanies the creation of art districts, and how do you try to address it? And Can street art affect the cultural memory of a space and its inhabitants, especially art districts? If yes, how do you go about on deciding a theme for such places, considering you're shaping its memory along with its aesthetics too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that largely, Sumona, like I addressed like sort of these
Yeah,
questions.
yeah,
I think that see, one of the things that we really want to do more is like, sort of running those interviews, because this question is something that, of course, like I ask myself, and we run interviews in all our art districts. But see, I think that history like is not created in 5 years. Like we should keep in mind very strongly those questions in order not to invade spaces, but to try and create those memories, to try and relate to those spaces, which means research, as basic as it is. Research on the city, research on the dynamism of the larger city, research on how that place in which you are intervening relates to the city, because I mean, it's not that if you are, curing the kidney, you are not taking care of, like your liver, because we are a body. And I always see the city as a body. And that's the problem of current cities, that they don't work as a holistic body. They are all separated. And inevitably, these like brings problems also to the heart. You feel that the heart is like, disconnected, and it's like, sort of, how can I say, with no problems. No, it's not, because if your foot is like sort of rotten, it's going to impact the heart as well. And this is exactly how we try to read the city. So long story short, from our side, there is this sort of toolbox of like really research, right? Understanding of the dynamisms in the macro picture and then in the micro picture, right? That's how, like we pick up the themes. Another district that we have in Mahim, which is like Dharavi, that is one of the largest slum, right? Of India, which is called the poorest slum. Now, what makes Mahim rich? The people. So what we have done there is like basically dedicating the art district to the everyday man. We just do portraits of the with most different styles, responding also to the diversity of those people, just to say, like, I mean, you are the invisibles, but you are the backbone of the city, and so, I mean, like, also as basic things as they can be, but you need to find your key to connect, right? And that's when you start like the memory building, hopefully. But then history should say, and if it's something valid, you don't understand it after 4 years, you understand it perhaps after 20, 30, after a couple of generations, if you want to be very honest with ourselves.
Absolutely. And research, because sometimes research can also seem like you're researching on site, like it can become an anthropological approach. Like you are the researcher, they are the subject. But even like, I guess what you also mean is this kind of dialogue and engagement and, talking to people about what they want and doing collaborative design workshops, collaborative, public space, imagining workshops, envisioning workshops, and bringing people together in these kind of processes of collaboratively mapping their stories. I think that's something we found very helpful at Hamdasti as well. The research itself can be participatory, where people are shaping what stories they want to share or what stories they want to tell, and also what ends up happening. The artist, of course, has a role because they have that kind of dexterity with the visual or with the idea of the process of envisioning, but we can always bring people into that process through collaborative, interactions, workshops, pop-ups, design, sort of design work meets and things like that. So I think there's so many tools that we can use to bring those different visions together, memories together, histories together. So it's always fun to experiment with that. Nivedita, do we have more time for more questions, or how are we doing?
About 7 minutes.
7 minutes, not bad. Okay, Julia, are there any questions that you want to pick up, or I'm also scrolling through?
Yeah, I was trying basically to, because I have to stop sharing. Sorry, guys. So, how do I volunteer for any of the future projects? Okay, this this is good. That's great. Hi, Giulia. So I'm gonna perhaps just type can I type in the box to just share our answer?
Yes, you can. You can type in the chat box to all panelists and attendees.
Okay, cool. So let me, basically you can just like write a team at st-artindia.org. And that's privately, I would like to share, no, I don't know, like Nivedita, I just like shared it here. How did you get as many members of the community to participate? I think that we kind of
addressed
referred to
some of
that,
these.
right?
Yeah. This one, the next one we address. Deepak has a question about how can collaborative art practices actually transform communities. So I think Julia and I have both problem with this word transform or impact. I don't know whether through art we're actually trying to transform something. What we're actually trying to do is to constantly question and to constantly raise discussion and to constantly shift the status quo. I mean, at least for Hamdasti, Chitpur is a heritage neighborhood, so there's a lot of discussion about converting it into a heritage zone. But freezing something in time, or coming up with a solution which is permanent, maybe is not the way. Maybe it's not something artists can do, but artists can always, raise questions or create new ideas or generate discussion. So I really do think that's our role. I know that feels like I should be talking about more deep impact, changing people's minds and hearts. But what we really want to do is bring different ideas and thoughts and perspectives together and have healthy discussions. And hopefully through that, two people who are coming together to discuss something which they maybe haven't spoken about before. For example, women's roles in their families, have come with their own points, and they emerge from that process with a small shift or a small change in perspective. And that's I think is the most powerful moment. When that happens, you really know. And why it needs to be collaborative and why people need to come together to do that, I really feel, is because otherwise it's a one-way dialogue. As soon as you bring people into the process of making it, their ownership and their stake and their involvement is already much higher, in really engaging deeply in those moments where we are looking at a bioscope and listening to the stories of women in the community. If you've been a part of that process, your engagement with that is much deeper, so that moment of exchange or encounter or dialogue becomes much richer, I think. So that's how I would sort of look at it. But yeah.
And actually,
Julia,
Shuman, if I may add, if you think like how much communication, mass media communication, has impacted like our lives all over the world, right? So the impact. Now, what we usually see is that kind of content, right? Like that's the content that sort of inform us the most in one way or the other, right? Being the advertisements in the streets where there are those beautiful bodies always perfectly shaped, whatever, but visual culture is what shapes our memories, but also our identities and also our system of comprehension about things. And most of the times, if you think about it, this visual culture is sort of getting also all of us in a very individualistic consumption. We are with the screen of our laptop, of our TV, of our phone alone, and basically we are just like, getting this sort of content without even having the possibility of talking about this content. And that's where, like all your sort of, kind of, how can I say, like thought processes are getting triggered. And I think that is like absolutely fundamental to go back in that togetherness of understanding, and of having the content of life, which is what Sumona was talking about. What is the role of women in our houses, and all of those topics which are not spoken about in what we usually consume on a daily basis. So yeah, I guess that's the, like if you think about how much communication affects us and builds our memory, that's what we are trying to do, not in a mass way, but in a ground rooted way, I guess. Yeah. I'm also reading
Okay.
now.
And there are two questions. One, Nivedita, did you want to say something?
No, I was going to ask a question, but I think it's been like answered in many different ways by you both. I don't know if you have something to add, but to me, it's very interesting that as a curator, as a public art curator or community art project curator, there is obviously a certain influence that you have over the community, because whether it exists in a mural or the projects that you initiate. So and every district, every community is so unique to each other. What might be the first thought here or the first question here that you try to address as the curator? Is it too broad a question? Because I felt it had been
No,
answered, but
no.
I mean,
No,
Sumona,
I
I
think
think
so.
I've answered like from my side, which is basically the research and reading the territory within this microcosmos and etc. So I really would leave it on you.
yeah.
We try to find so in Hamdasti always began with like what would happen if there were artists in our schools, in our communities, in police stations, in government buildings, and what could artists do in those spaces. So we always try to find an artist whose interest matches with the community group that they're working with in some way or the other. They may be it may be, they may not be expressing it in the same way, they may not be using the same language, but there's a match in the interest. And then we try to place then we start a process where they start to get to know each other, start to first discuss what is the project, what will it be. So I think it really begins with that two people having some shared values or some shared interests, or two groups having some shared values and shared interests, and beginning with that. And also we try to see, is the artist going to be able to use local crafts, local techniques, will they be able to sort of have an appreciation for local histories. So I think we do that. And we also try to see the power dynamic between the artist and the person that they're working with. Personally, for me, I've also been involved as a practicing artist myself in many of these projects. I often go to very heavily male dominated spaces, and I just feel like over there I have a different power dynamic, they have a different power dynamic, and it's interesting to negotiate that versus me coming in and being a teacher in a school, or coming in with a kind of very top down sort of power dynamic. So I think we try to find that kind of connection between the artist and who they're working with and where they're working when we start. So
Okay, thank you. Julia, I think you're right. I mean, with your examples of taking us through Kanagi, as well as, the Sassoon Docs projects, and how you spoke about placing the images next to each other and this dialogue that it started with the cast. So, which is why I was holding back. I was like, I feel like it's been answered with start. So Sumona, thank you. We have a couple of other questions as well, but we're a little short on time. So is there anything specific that either of you wants to pick up that you might have seen, or?
I think we've answered most of the questions in some way or the other, and it's been,
Yeah, I mean,
thank you,
I think
Julia,
that the
for your
only
openness.
is this question. Like, I mean, sometimes artists considered as classist. What's your opinion on that? I mean that's kind of like interesting, because I think that exactly because of that, but exactly because like the love for art and understanding of the power of it, I think that we are trying not to make it classist, as simple as that. And it's classist like just when it's like not accessible, because when you enter in a gallery and you're not well dressed, you're looked upon, and you would never ever think of entering into a gallery where art is maybe great, but it's essentially a commodity. It's a good and is sold, and therefore you don't have access to it, and therefore why you should feel that you are even allowed to enter and look at it. It's for a few, and that's the point. So here instead it's the other way around, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And I also, like Julia, to your point, I also think it stops becoming classes when also you participate in the making of it, that it's in your schools, in your homes. And, that's when you feel that connection sort of, you feel that those walls breaking down. You may not be a practicing artist, but that's why, as I think the participation part of it is also so important to the process, because one is to be able to see in a public space, but then one also be able to feel like you understand it, or you connect with it, or that you enjoy it too, so that coming from that kind of personal connection, having art as a part of your everyday life, whether you're painting the planters in your house or whether you are looking at art of great masters and great accomplished women or other trans people in the arts. So whenever you're looking at people, if you have that personal connection, then it also, I think, but that might be the biggest and the toughest barrier to break. Even when we take art to public spaces, breaking that barrier might be the most challenging, I think, at the end of it.
I mean, at times it is. At times, like, I think that everyone loves colors. So in our examples, like you give like a bucket of color,
True.
and like everyone just say wants to sort of jump in. I think that the balance that it's very important to create, and I think that you also, Sumona, in your work, like you do it wonderfully, is like how to bring these things together and having actions or pieces which are very, very good art, because I find very problematic when it then becomes just amatorial. One thing is the participation, one thing is also like, giving very good art, because otherwise we are misinforming. So I think that's also because otherwise, like, after the, if
another
it's
like
art word, that then you're like, okay, I mean, your value is like, bad art, it's amatorial. And that's like very problematic. Then you really reinforce that classism somehow.
Then yours is just like
there are
this cute
spaces for
charity project on the side, and we're not really, looking at it critically. We're not trying to make it critical. We're not trying to make it innovative. We're not trying to push the boundaries. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct. So that's also very important. Otherwise, we also perpetuate this classism, I guess, So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so on this note, thank you so much, Giulia and Sumona, for your time, and also for this very insightful conversation on, I hate to use the word, but impact street art can have on building communities and regenerating urban spaces. And I think mostly what it leaves behind is the well-being for the community and the participants, and just revitalizing their spaces. So thank you so much, and I hope our audience enjoyed it.